On the show, we've long said the real story is China and the coming war there. It's not Ukraine. Western countries are starting to beat the drums of war very loudly. And there are concerning indications this afternoon that the Western governments are trying to provoke China into a war over Taiwan sooner rather than later. It's like they're really trying to ramp this up sooner. I mean, I don't know why. Well, I do know why, but it's like, okay, why? We have a sped up timetable?
Foreplay is exhausting, you know?
Yeah, like just cut to the chase.
Let's just get to it.
Like Kramer said on Seinfeld, you faked it? Yeah, if it's been a long night, went to a show, went to a theater, and it's enough already. Just get to it. Cut to the chase. So again, these are the waters right off the coast of mainland China where the USS Ronald Reagan is now being put back on patrol. The White House announcing that the aircraft carrier, the USS Ronald Reagan, will continue to patrol the area off Taiwan, along with other warships, continuing to run drills in that area. Nikkei this afternoon breaking a bombshell story, Nikkei Asia, reporting that U.S. is now in talks with Taiwan to co-produce American weapons. Yeah, what the hell? So they're going to start co-producing American weapons in Taiwan. I want you to think back and just go beyond the headline here on that.
Well, these weapons do require semiconductors. We know where we can get some.
Right. But think about this for a second.
So will it say designed in America, assembled in Taiwan?
Yeah. Designed by Apple in Cupertino, made in Taiwan.
Yeah.
Think about, I'm just trying to think of the analogy.
I-bomb.
I'm trying to think of the analogy for a second. So let's think about Puerto Rico. Maybe Puerto Rico would be maybe a good example. We find out that, I don't know, China is now building weapons along with Puerto Rico, in Puerto Rico.
Which we consider ours.
And as part of the United States, right? What would we do? Maybe it's not the best analogy. It's the best one I can think of at the moment. But what would we do? Oh, China is now building weapons against us in Puerto Rico in our backyard.
Yeah, that is a pretty good analogy.
So the White House is in talks, according to Nikkei this afternoon, with Taiwanese leaders to jointly produce U.S.-designed weapons to deter and defend against a potential Chinese invasion. Japanese news outlet Nikkei reporting, while discussions remain in their early stages, officials will likely reach a deal by 2023 that involves technology transfers from U.S. contractors to Taiwanese manufacturers or U.S.-based assembly of weapons using Taiwan-made parts, Nikkei reported, citing 3 officials familiar with the discussions. The unusual move comes amid high-level warnings that China plans to imminently invade Taiwan while the U.S. and allies run low on weapons and ammunition. Thanks, Nikkei, for that pretty big of a bombshell report. On Friday, you might not have noticed if you were busy with your family, the Pentagon, and that's why they released this information on Friday nights, is looking now for sweeping new powers in preparation for a war with China. So the Senate, the National Defense Bill, increases proposed military aid to Taiwan from $4.5 billion up to $10 billion. We are now going to send for defense and weapons inside of Taiwan. Here's Arnaud Bertrand, who says, okay, this is terrifying. Pentagon seeks wartime procurement powers with the intent to move more aggressively with an eye on the potential for a confrontation with China. They're quite literally preparing aggressively for war with China.
Okay, how are they going to spend that? Xinping's tax.
Jinping's tax?
The Xi Jinping, the like how, like the Putin's tax.
The Xi Jinping price hike?
Yeah. It doesn't roll off the tongue.
No,
you got to send that. You got to send that to the think tank to sell it a little bit better.
The Xi Jinping cash register going cha-ching?
No, that didn't work.
Trying something.
The ping sting.
Ping. There you go.
Are you feeling the ping sting at the pump? You can blame China for that.
See, we are not good propagandists. We are terrible propagandists.
The ping sting. That's pretty good. Again, this is like they've all, and of course, the MAGA people have been trying to paint Biden as like a Chinese puppet, right? That he's just a puppet of China. No, he's not. The guy literally just last week instituted an export ban, and basically anybody who, an American or a green card holder who is making semiconductors or working in the semiconductor business in China will lose their citizenship So they have to quit their job immediately, and it immediately disrupted the entire semiconductor industry, like in catastrophe. So what are they doing all of a sudden to try to provoke China so that China is forced to actually go into Taiwan? Now, we shouldn't say invade because Taiwan is China. And if you listen to Biden, we recognize a one China policy. So we say we recognize a one China policy, but then we do the exact opposite of that. And we're basically doing the exact opposite of calling it a one China policy.
It's like my mom says, he talks out of both sides of his mouth.
Yes. So this is what the Pentagon is saying. According to the Pentagon, bipartisan legislation introduced in the Senate would grant the Pentagon wartime procurement powers. What war? What war are we in with China?
The one we want.
I mean, the Pentagon is going to get wartime procurement weapons power for China, against China, in Taiwan. And no one's talking about this. Why is everyone silent on this in the mainstream media? It's happening right before our freaking eyes, people. Here's the next piece of this. Whether you want to call it wartime contracting or emergency contracting, we can't play around anymore. The aide says, we can't pussyfoot around with minimum sustaining weapons buys of these munitions. It's hard to think of something as high on everybody's list as buying a ton of munitions for the next few years for our operational plans against China. And we need to continue supplying Ukraine. Okay. So Bertrand Arnaud points out that the military-industrial complex is happy about this. Here's Raytheon stock this morning. Of course, any of these weapons manufacturers are just thrilled about this. The rest of the stock market is in a tailspin. Jeff Bezos this afternoon saying we are in for a catastrophe in the economy. And you better batten down the hatches. Those were his words. Batten down the hatches. And Raytheon is doing well. Like all these weapons manufacturers, green candles. Like their stocks are all up because a war is so profitable for these clowns. That's the U.S. media. Here's the British media's coverage of this, because they're in the tank with them too, prepping us all for this coming war. Here's this headline from the Telegraph. 4 ways China could take Taiwan as military tensions boil over. Here are the details. When China decides to take Taiwan by force, it will aim to do so via a lightning-fast 48-hour offensive so that the West does not have time to respond, diplomatic sources have told the Telegraph. Right. So diplomatic sources are sharing specific Chinese military strategy with a British newspaper. Do you think we are all stupid?
I mean, didn't we already share our complete military strategy on MSNBC with that war game we played?
Oh, yeah, you're right. That was about China.
I mean, really? The British press thinks we're serious about we're going to fall for this, that China is sharing their military strategy with Taiwan with British newspapers, and here's the 4-part plan. Here is laid out for you.
And someone will read that and be like, okay, I'm ready.
Okay.
Got it.
Thanks. Tony Blinken is claiming without any evidence, mind you, that Beijing has greatly accelerated its plans to annex Taiwan because, of course, they really, really, really want this war with China, and they want it quickly. So how do you keep provoking them? We send Nancy Pelosi. Then we send Tony Pompeo, whatever his name is. What's his name?
Mike Pompeo.
Mike Pompeo. They sent him, and then then they sent the whole congressional delegation to Taiwan.
Yes.
And then we are doing all sorts of weapons drills right around there. And oh, by the way, we are supporting Japan with new weapons as well. And we're going to start building weapons in Taiwan. Like what else and we're going to cancel contracts and make sure that any American who's working on semiconductors in China will lose their American citizenship. So you better come home and destroying their entire semiconductor industry. That's how it works. So here's Anthony Blinken saying, remember, he said, China is it's an absolute threat. And look, we probably need to move much more quickly on China now. Watch.
Blinken's comments came at the end of a forum yesterday at Stanford with former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice.
There has been a change in the approach from Beijing toward Taiwan in recent years. And instead of sticking with the status quo that was established in a positive way, a fundamental decision that the status quo was no longer acceptable, and that Beijing was determined to pursue reunification on a much faster timeline, and if peaceful means didn't work, then it would employ coercive means, and possibly, if coercive means don't work, maybe forceful means to achieve its objectives. And that is what is profoundly disrupting the status quo and creating tremendous tensions.
So,
I mean, wasn't it as a bit of a provocation when we arrested the CEO of Huawei's daughter? Like, we worked with Canada and did all that. I mean, wasn't that pretty much a provocation because we were saying that they were working with the Chinese government and yada, yada, canceling all these contracts, and we arrested her, and that was like a big story. And it's like, that didn't work. So now they've got to move on to,
Yeah, and there's actually an anecdote. Remember in the book, This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends, New York Times cyber reporter Nicole Perlroth talks about how the United States government had been installing spyware in Chinese televisions. Remember that story?
Right. And the concern about Huawei, of course, and using cell towers and all that. Well, this afternoon, huge news on Huawei, by the way, because you have a number of members of Congress who've now written to the Biden administration bipartisan letter saying absolutely you cannot let Huawei build a new semiconductor plant in Beijing. So, pressuring now to try to get the Biden administration to step in against Huawei building a new plant in Shanghai. So there you go. So that was Antony Blinken.
Well, I was just going to say real quick to know that that's all about profits is like the majority of the backbone of every cellular network in this country is Huawei. So, they would have to completely destroy the infrastructure in this country to get rid of Huawei. So it's like, we'll take Huawei for now, but anything new. So that just tells you that it's all about profits.
I didn't realize that. So in the U.S., that's like the main backbone in the United States.
Yeah, they were the only ones making the technology for like the LTE and the initial 5G networks. So they're all Huawei.
But I know throughout Europe, of course, there's been like different countries making moves on like not allowing them. I know Portugal didn't want Huawei building in Portugal and some other European countries. But yeah, I guess you're right. So for the most part, it's widespread. So that was Antony Blinken. Then on Sunday, the Chinese president, Xi Jinping, during the opening of the Chinese Communist Party event, said, quote, resolving the Taiwan issue is a matter for the Chinese, a matter that must be resolved by us, Chinese people. We will continue to strive for a peaceful reunification with the greatest sincerity and the utmost effort, but we will never promise to renounce the use of force, and we reserve the option of taking all measures necessary. Now, of course, the West went on to, it was like, look, he's going to invade Taiwan. He's going after Taiwan. He's going to do this after this speech, but they missed the nuance of it. But if you actually watch the speech and you listen to it, among the things he said is there's only a few people in Taiwan who, like the separatists, who are being stoked and provided by the West that are causing this problem. And he said the majority of Taiwanese want the reunification to be done peacefully, and they want to be a part of main China. That's what he said. What do you think? We've heard from our viewers to say that's the case. That is actually the case. Let us know your thoughts on that. All of Washington, D.C., though, pundits and everyone else, and the think tankers came right out after the speech, and they went right to the defense of Antony Blinken. It's like he says it, then they parrot it all over social media over the past 24 hours, which is, let's go to war right now. Here's Matt Stoller, who tweeted this: the U.S. needs to decouple our supply chains from China and mobilize for war ASAP. I really don't understand the apathy.
Oh, you
just read that.
Okay.
Read that again.
You want to decouple the... no, you don't, because then you're really going to see inflation if you do that. Give that a try and see what happens.
I really don't understand the apathy to not want to go to war with one of the largest countries in the world. We would be wiped off the map if we go to war with China. I don't understand the apathy.
Well, the economy of that is just completely ignorant. Like, go into your house and look at where most of the things are made, most of the cheaply possessed goods that you have, and then ask other people to decouple the supply chain. Right. That is ridiculous.
I don't understand the apathy here.
And basically, I wonder, I'm not sure how many years ago it was, but we were borrowing $5 billion a day from China. I'm sure it's way more than that today. So you would take like all of the supplies. I mean, goodbye Walmart, goodbye Target, goodbye all of the chain stores that you go to and buy your groceries, buy your goods. Understand, even chicken goes over to China, is processed and sent back here, and it's cheaper than processing in the United States. So you would lose so much of your food market.
Yeah, that's
I've told this story before. I'll tell it again. go to a super Walmart in Hawley, Pennsylvania, near our house, and looked at the ground beef at the super Walmart. And at the ground beef came from 3 places. You can look where on the packaging where it came from. A third of it came from China. A third of it came from Argentina. And like a third of it came from, I think, America. Think about that for a second.
That's gross.
In one package, you had like from 3 different continents providing meat in one package of ground beef. So think about the economy of that. I can't understand the apathy of how. Here's a guy on Twitter, Elbridge Colby, who tweeted in response to Matthew Stoller. He says, This is the Secretary of State, referring to Antony Blinken, of a Democratic administration. This is not a random think tanker. Why are we not on a national mobilization footing, he asks. If we get in a war, we will have to be. But by then, it may be too late. So why are we not mobilizing right now, he asks. So who is Elbridge Colby? Doesn't it sound like a guy who, went to Harvard?
Sure.
Like
I was going to say defense contractor of some kind.
Young Elbridge. Can you put that back up there on the screen? Yeah. So who is Elbridge Colby? Like a little Harvard guy. Elbridge, come inside. It's time for tea now, Elbridge. Young Elbridge. He's the co-founder and principal of the Marathon Initiative, a principal initiative focused on developing strategies to prepare the United States for an era of sustained great power competition. He's the author of the book, The Strategy of Denial, American Defense in an Age of Great Power Conflict. He went to Harvard.
He sounds like a peaceful person.
Okay, Elbridge, what do you think about this, Elbridge? Remember,
well, there's a huge issue though, like with this whole like decoupling from China thing, and the big one that comes up in my mind is for anybody that likes electronics. If you are like a big fan of any kind of electronics whatsoever that we have in our modern era, all
clearly,
the rare earth metals.
Clearly, we are not.
Yeah.
No, definitely not. Like the rare earth metals come from like 2 places on Earth, basically, and that's in China and in the Ukraine.
Right.
And so if we decouple from that, we're also going to have to get rid of all of our electronics.
Right. I mean, you
really
think about
good at recycling them.
Well, you think about Tesla's investment in lithium, right? So there's a bunch of smaller mines, and so the demand for lithium for batteries right now. I mean, this is the future right now, and so Elon Musk and Tesla funneling lots of money to a lot of smaller upstart junior mining companies right now because they don't have enough production. So lithium, uranium, all of these different rare earth minerals that are either in Japan, either in Russia in large part, and then not so much in large part in China. So that's why you have this unification. You have this this cozy relationship now between Russia, who is able to provide the petroleum, able to provide those rare earth minerals to China, and then China has their own batch that they're able to provide to Russia. You're going to create a whole new world order. This is exactly what's happening right before our eyes. Remember, so the United States has a one China policy. That's our policy, right? That means that Taiwan is China. But that didn't stop President Biden 2 weeks ago on 60 Minutes from saying that the U.S. would use by any means necessary to defend Taiwan, including the use of force and American soldiers. Remember that on 60 Minutes. Then he had to walk it back later, of course, telling us, because that's the thing, he told us the truth up front. And then even Scott Pelley, we can't play the damn 60 Minutes clips because they copyright us all the time, so you can't do it. But I'm telling you, you'll remember, Scott Pelley from CBS doubled down on that question. Remember, because President Biden said it. He's like, yeah, we would use force. We would absolutely use force. We'd use American forces. And Scott Pelley doubled down and said, sir, I just want to be clear. So what you're saying is you would be using American forces, men and women, to go in and defend Taiwan. He said, yes.
Yes. He
said yes, right? And then, of course, the next day, Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor, had to come out and walk that whole thing back. But he doubled down on that. So, what's the walking back here? But listen.
He was asked a question, a hypothetical question in this interview. We continue to stand behind the one China policy. We continue to stand against unilateral changes to the status quo, and we continue to stand for peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait. The president has reiterated those basic commitments on every occasion that he's talked about Taiwan, including in this interview.
Oh, okay. So you're just full of shit, is basically what you're saying. So how is the mainstream media painting this story? So Bradley Bowman is a former advisor, U.S. Senate National Security Advisor. He was on the Dan Abrams show. And this is how the mainstream media spins this. I just want you to listen to how these by the way, just look at that lower third graphic there on the screen. Former advisor, U.S. Senate National Security Advisor. Okay. Former advisor, U.S. Senate National Security Advisor. But they don't tell you what his current position is, which is at a think tank. So they don't tell you that on the screen. They tell you what he was, but they don't tell you what he's currently advocating for, which of course is think tankery and spreading democracy through the use of force. Like that's what you do when you work at these think tanks. So here's Bradley Bowman giving us his think tankery discussion on what he sees for U.S. policy in China. Listen.
I think America has democratic principles at stake in Taiwan and core national and economic security interests. Democratic principles, what do I mean by that? I think when you have an authoritarian bully trying to squelch freedom or end freedom, that America is and should be interested. Our core democratic principles are at stake, whether that's in Ukraine or Taiwan. And I think we also have core economic interests there. Taiwan is a leading producer of semiconductors.
I was waiting for you to get to that part. I was waiting for you to get to the good part, right? So, yeah, we're worried about a dictator. We're worried about a bully. So here's how we'll show you about democracy. We will send warships to your backyard, and we will pump billions of dollars in weapons in your country and tell you what to do because we're not bullies. We just spread democracy. But, our interests are, of course, the semiconductors.
A lot of important maritime traffic goes through the Taiwan Strait. And if Beijing were successful in conquering Taiwan, America's ability to protect its core interest in that part of the world, and including along the first island chain, would be much, much weaker. And I think many would have to conclude that America is a weakened and less credible power, and you'd see a lot of nations deciding that they need to bandwagon with China rather than maintain their independence or side with the United States.
So this is what he gets paid for at the think tank.
It's crazy to hear them call other countries the bullies. When you look around the world, who else is doing what we do? Who else is spreading democracy with guns and in 9 different countries and military bases all over, weapons pointing at all of these bigger countries? Like, who else does this? No one.
And getting involved in things that, presumably could be solved by democratic sovereign states. We're not even talking about the back and forth between North Korea right now. And we know where the United States would go with that. And absolutely, we would find more money if and when that ratchets up. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just think about the way that he lays that out, that America's might, we prove America's might by putting warships in the South China Sea, nowhere in our hemisphere, nowhere in our backyard, literally on their doorstep. I come back to my Puerto Rico analogy. If China was in our territorial waters, blockading ports in the Gulf of Mexico and through Mexico and down into Puerto Rico and all through that area, what would we do? We know exactly what we would do. So it's ridiculous to think that this is, that they are somehow being the bullies in this situation.
David Spiro, the economist, the author of the book, The Hidden Hand of American Hegemony, talks about how because the American dollar and the American economy has all but collapsed after the petrodollar recycling agreements that we came up with in the 70s have sort of fallen flat and allowed us to print money. And because it's such a fragile economic system, the United States needs to sort of act like bullies and basically subsist on a reputation more than actual fundamentals of an economy. And we see that played out when we get involved in all kinds of stuff, right? It's like a neighborhood. There's one neighbor who is acting bigger even though they're broke, like trying to
keeping up with the Joneses.
Boost their, there's a whole movie about that. There's like many movies about that, right? But but we see this, you continue to inflate yourself because you don't want anybody coming inside your house and taking a look at what's really there.
Like a porcupine, which is the term, in fact, that the Taiwanese premier Su Tseng-chang dismissed claims that the U.S. is seeking to turn Taiwan into a giant weapons depot porcupine after Washington says that the island must be pumped full of weapons. So we need to send billions of weapons. That's why we're asking for more. We want the procurement of the availability of the Pentagon. And the Taiwanese premier saying, no, we don't want that. We don't want that. We're just publicly, we're going to say we don't want that. But okay, privately, they are accepting plenty of weapons. Just take a look. I mean, and all of these armored vehicles just rolling through the streets, brand new weapons showing up, brand new shiny weapons coming from the United States. Here you go. Here's all of your brand new weapons from U.S. tax dollars so we can start this war with China. I mean, this is what we're doing. And Japan, by the way, is going to now join the fray with an announcement of a massive military buildup as well. Japan points to the year 2027 as the year that China becomes the dominant world power. And they are now, according to an analysis, rushing to rearm at the largest level since World War II in preparation for this. And of course, we will assist with that as well. So these battle lines are being drawn. You're seeing these BRICS nations. You saw Indonesia today announcing that maybe we'd like to join the BRICS nations. Russia, Brazil, India, China, and South Africa. Can you make room for Indonesia, which is a U.S. ally? Oh, I thought Kamala Harris just was there and telling us how we're going to start to set up military
we have to get
bases.
involved there then if they're going to try and get involved because we don't, NATO can expand as much as it wants. BRICS cannot.
No.
So then do we have to, get involved in Indonesia?
Yeah, why not?
Okay.
We're going to Haiti. We'll go to Indonesia. We'll stick our American boot wherever you want.